Welcome to Messy Liberation, the podcast that dives deep into feminism, business, and personal growth. I'm Becky Mollenkamp.
And I'm Taina Brown. Get ready for another messy conversation through the eyes of two intersectional feminist coaches.
Let's get messy.
Hi.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm doing all right. I think I'm on the tail end of my third time having COVID.
Everyone's kind of got it right now, but you traveled.
I did travel, and I usually get it after traveling.
Like every person I know who's been on an airplane.
It's almost impossible between all the different people you come across in an airplane or an airport. I am glad I got the most recent booster a little over a month ago.
Thank you for the reminder. Hey, listeners, don't forget to get your boosters. And now we're at the point where you can probably do it at the same time you do your flu shot. Yep. So you just get it all done.
Switching gears, I follow this podcast duo on TikTok called the I've Had It podcast, and it's two older white women who are hilarious.
Older, but I just want to be kind because if they happen to hear this, middle-aged.
Older than me.
Yeah, okay.
They're middle-aged. Yeah, let me put some respect on them. They're two established white women.
I like that. Established is a nice word. It's even better than mature.
Yes, two established, very well established white women. Yes. They have this podcast called I've Had It. To be completely transparent, don't remember their names. I'm horrible with names.
Jennifer Welch and Angie Pumps Sullivan.
And I don't know anything about them other than they have this podcast. So if they've been problematic at some point, please don't come for me.
From what I've seen of them, they seem to have it for white women. As a white woman,
they're pretty tight. I think.
They seem to be doing pretty well.
I came across one of their TikToks about this study that they came across about how couples who don't post their couple life on social media are 70 or 79% happier versus couples who might post 2 or 3 selfies or couple-ish posts a week. And a lot of the responses were who the hell has time to post that much per week?
Except I've seen them, and I bet you have too.
I've definitely seen them. I've seen couples who share social media accounts, and that's always been weird to me.
I was gonna say that, so that creeps me out the most, and definitely to me is a
red flag.
A red flag for Divorce City. I could be wrong, but
it's you have no frame of reference for your own independent thought or side of yourself. But anyway, I digress. And so it just made me think about relationships in general, right? And this is something that I think is on our list of potential topics, which is the difference between heteronormative relationships and queer relationships also, or the presumed differences in those relationships. Do lesbian couples, right? Are they generally happier than non-lesbian couples?
I was gonna say, hold on, let me tell you what I presume, and you can tell me where I'm right and wrong. Well, one, we presume you share clothes.
But straight couples sometimes share clothes too. I've seen that.
They do. I'm just talking about presumptions here, and you can tell me where I'm right and wrong. You'd have to be similar sizes, obviously, so there's always that too within any couple, right? And that I think most people think that there's probably some amount of that it's easier or more harmonious, but also just easier because there's more shared understanding of experience. That's, I think that's what most people would think. Two women together, they both understand PMS. They both understand what the dangers of going out in the world and having men catcall them. All these things that we just have that shared understanding. Two men together have their own shared understandings of whatever men experience in life. I don't know. But so that's my theory.
Yeah. So I'm going to debunk that for you right now.
Do it.
Because we could argue, right, that if you have a heteronormative couple, right, a straight couple who are from the same class, right, maybe they were both middle class or both lower class, right, grew up lower class, we could argue that because they share that same experience, right, by that logic, we could say because they share that same experience, there's a better understanding between them, right, and so they might have a better relationship. And so I think what happens is when people think about straight versus non-straight relationships, the assumption is that non-straight relationships might be more harmonious. Like, for instance, a relationship between two women, because they have that shared experience. But what that argument does is like it flattens context, right? And so, does my wife have the same body parts as I do? Yes, we both have breasts, we both have a vagina, like, but that doesn't mean that like all people who identify as lesbian have the same body parts or have the same shared experience. And so, because there are other factors to our identities, other factors to like the context in which we grew up. And so I think there's this idea that like, well, you just don't have as many problems. But I need to say that like my wife and I are struggling. Like, I feel like we have a pretty happy relationship. And to be completely transparent, my wife identifies as a lesbian. I identify as pansexual. I do not identify as a lesbian. I still find men attractive every once in a while. Like, I'm still like, damn, I would hit that D. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not a lesbian. And
yeah,
so
well, that also brings up though other stereotypes, and one where we have some commonality and understanding, which is, I think people often think if you're bisexual or pansexual and in a hetero presenting relationship, but I think also, actually, I just think if people think if you're bisexual or pansexual and you're in a long-term committed relationship, that you can't be fulfilled, you can't be happy, you're going to cheat, whatever, because if you're attracted to both men and women, or in, I think our case, attracted to just a person, whoever they are, that you're not going to be fulfilled by just being with one or the other by this binary thinking. And that's also something that I think we need to debunk, because that's bullshit. I choose, it's the same as thinking, well, because you're straight, you couldn't be happy in a relationship because you're only with one man, but you're attracted to lots of men.
Right.
So, like it doesn't really make sense when we put it under the microscope, but people, it's still this assumption that I'm sure you've heard as well, where people, and I think sometimes your partners can carry that same baggage or that same concern where they're like, am I going to be enough to satisfy you? Are you going to wander because I'm not fulfilling that other part of what you're interested in? And it's the same answer is no more than you're going to be looking at other people because am I enough? I'm only one woman and you're attracted to lots of women. So
absolutely. Yeah. When I was coming out, which was like a little over 10 years ago now, I just remember hearing a lot about like people, like women in lesbian relationships or, bisexual relationships or pansexual relationships, right? Who are just like, the worst thing you could do if you are a woman or in a relationship with another woman is like cheat on them or leave them for someone who's not a woman. And it's like, no, the worst thing you could do is cheat. Like, let's remove gender or sexuality from the equation. Like, why is it more difficult to stomach someone cheating on you with someone of the opposite sex or of another gender or sexuality versus someone of the same gender or sexuality? Like,
I don't know. That's funny because my mind is the exact opposite, where I'd be like, well, if you cheat on me with somebody the opposite, with something I don't have, I would actually feel better about, not that again, all of it, like, you just don't cheat, right? I get that. But to me, in my mind goes to like, it makes more sense because I'd be like, well, I couldn't compete. Like, I can't do that. I can't do what that body does. So like, okay. I
so of course it makes a little bit of sense.
Right. Like, actually, I feel like if you cheated on me with another woman, I'd be like, oh, what does she have that I don't? Like that's where my brain could get to, even though none of that's healthy. But so anyway, I hear that. I think that's interesting. I think historically for men, I don't know. It's interesting. I feel like men might have that more than women, but maybe not.
Maybe we should have a man on the show soon to talk about.
Well, that's interesting because I met a man that I want to talk to you about having him on the show. So maybe we will. But yes. Because I'm curious about that. I wonder how because men are wired, like not wired differently. They're conditioned differently around that creates their own set of insecurities. But I know for me personally, anyway, if I was with another person, I would almost prefer they cheat on me with somebody who was not with a man, whether I was with a man who cheated with a man or a woman who cheated with me, a man, because then I'd be like, okay, at least it wasn't
something
me
that I have. Yeah. It's not comparable. It's not comparable.
But ultimately though, Ty, what you're saying is none of that matters because none of it shouldn't matter at all because it's not about like, ultimately, I think for most, I think, and I'll always think this, that I think most people, their sexuality and their gender, all of it exists on a spectrum. You know, some people don't like that discussion and don't agree, but I just think when most of us are allowed to be fully free, if we were free from all conditioning and all judgment, that ultimately I think most of us, we're attracted to humans.
Yeah.
Both sexually and intellectually and emotionally. And that there's a lot of space inside of that, of what that means and who that is. And that's why I think ultimately it shouldn't matter who they're cheating. Like, it shouldn't be a judgment on yourself who they're cheating on you with. Yeah. It's just that's a person.
Yeah, I agree, because it's not about the other person that you brought into the equation. It's about the betrayal, right? Like, because then to say, oh, it's about the other person, then what you're doing is like you're pointing blame in that direction, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is there might be something within the original relationship that needs to be repaired.
As somebody who has cheated, yes. I bring that experience into a relationship where now, like, if I were ever to be cheated on again, and I've been cheated on, but I've also been the person who's cheated, I recognize that it really says nothing about, the third person isn't the person. And that's why I go a little nuts when I see, like, in pop culture depictions anyway, they're always showing the woman getting mad at the other woman. And ultimately, it's not about that person. It just isn't. What happened was something about the relationship. It mostly, I think, says something about the person who cheated. As a person who's cheated, I think it mostly says something about the person who cheated. Yeah. Where they're at, you know, how they're feeling, their mental state, their ability to communicate, their traumas, all of that stuff. And then the next thing it says something about the relationship and maybe issues that have been going on there, lack of communication, fears, traumas inside of that. It's nothing about the other person, but it's easier to make it about the other person than to confront you, your partner, your relationship.
Yeah.
I know we didn't need to get onto cheating, but
no, but I think this is when you're talking about relationships, like, to not talk about the impact or how cheating can affect a relationship is like, it's a bit naive, right? It's like people who are like, well, I don't want to talk about death, right? It's like, well, it's a fact of life. Like, it's bound to happen. Yeah. Not that cheating is bound to happen, but like,
well, it is. It's not death. Everyone's going to be there, right? Cheating's not necessarily everyone, but I don't know what the percentages are. We could probably look them up, but I know it's high. Like, half of marriages end in divorce, and that's just marriages. Forget about relationships that are committed and not married. And not that cheating or infidelity is always a part of it, but it's a good, I'm going to guess it's a good number. I mean, I think most of us, the older you get, the more likely you've been cheated on and or have cheated. Yeah. And certainly that you know couples that have been, that have had problems because of that. It's just very common.
Yeah. I like what you said about, you know, attraction and sexuality and gender existing on a spectrum.
Oh, good, because some people don't like that.
No, I completely agree. I think, one, why would you limit yourself, right? Which is the whole reason I've identified as pansexual. Like,
right?
If I have a buffet in front of me, why would I limit myself to just one thing? Like,
to just a salad when there's, you know, fate.
Right. Not saying that I am actively looking to, like, cheat on my spouse. And I have no intention of ever doing that.
If you're listening.
I don't think she listens, but but I'm just saying, like, in terms of just like life in general, I think so often we are conditioned to limit ourselves. And if you were to take an honest look at what you like and what you don't like, I think most people would find that they exist somewhere on that spectrum. My wife, first of all, my wife thinks everybody's gay. Like, she thinks everybody's queer. Like, every time we meet someone new, we walk away, she's like, you think they're gay?
I think everyone's queer too. I think your wife is correct. I just don't think everyone's been able to confront that within themselves because of the conditioning that they've received that terrifies them. And I often believe the people who are the most adamantly anti-queer, it's because it's somewhere buried down deep inside of there. It's envy that's speaking. It is that jealousy of, like, how dare they get to live such a free life when I can't? Yeah. And I don't think that's always conscious. I think sometimes it is, but I think very often that's an unconscious thing that's happening. Yeah. They're not even aware that they're queer because they have repressed it so much out of the trauma and fear.
Yeah. I mean, I think to go even deeper with that, like, I think, yes, it's a reflection of the jealousy and envy of other people being able to live such authentic, free lives. I don't think that always means that that person is gay, but there is a aspect of that person that they are repressing. They are not living their most authentic life in order to feel that sense of envy and jealousy.
And to be clear, I didn't say gay. I said queer.
Queer.
Meaning I believe that they have some differences, whether it's around their sexuality or their gender or what, gender presentation.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't have to be all the way to an extreme. It could be that they are pansexual or interested.
Yeah.
Or maybe they just don't feel as masculine as they've been told they should. And they actually enjoy wearing a dress sometimes or putting on an eyeliner like JD Vance or, whatever
or
they
nail polish.
Right?
Or maybe they're asexual. Or demisexual.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Like, so to be clear, I definitely don't think every person is literally gay. Yeah. I believe all of us are queer, because that to me means something that's outside of the prescribed binary and the norms. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I agree. I love that definition of queer. There was a writer, I think it might have been Bell Hooks, who talks about queer not as in like gay, but queer as in like a resistance to the accepted norm, to the status quo. And
then I just keep getting more and more queer as I get older.
Right. And I think queer is also a political stance, right? Like, it's not just about gender and sexuality, but it's also about politics. And so there are a lot of examples out there about people who identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community who I would not call queer because of their politics. Right? Like, gays for Trump.
I don't know the Loghouse Republican folks. Like, somebody was talking to me about Tim Miller the other day and his reaction to something. And I was like, frankly, I don't care about Tim Miller's reaction to anything. Just because he's now supporting Harris, he still identifies as a Republican and he's still gay. And it will never, like, those two things do not make sense to me. And I can't take your opinion seriously.
Yeah. Because there's no analysis of power or politics. And I feel like the queer community, there's an imbued sense of power dynamics and a political analysis that exists there that not everyone who is gay or lesbian or non-binary accepts or really internally interrogates. Yeah. I have a friend who is not gay, but I would say exists somewhere on the spectrum, as we all do, who, when the last season of Bridgerton came out, I don't know if you watched Bridgerton.
No, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
I watched a bit of the first season and I don't know, it wasn't for me, but.
It's not for everybody. And that's okay. But Nicola Coughlan was the romantic lead, and, she's a full-figured, fat, beautiful, very, just does not shy away from that. And I remember in between seasons 2 and 3, like, there's a lot of tits and ass in Bridgerton, especially season 1. Oh my God, especially season 1. And so when it was like publicized that she was going to be the lead for season 3, I remember thinking to myself, and I'm sure a lot of people were thinking, were like, is she going to show her body? Like, well, what's up with that? And how's that going to play down? And she, as the premiere to the 3rd season, and this is old news if you're listening and you follow Bridgerton, but when the premiere, as the premiere got closer, she was like, hell yeah, I'm showing my body. I'm not ashamed of my body. I have perfect breasts. Like, that's like a statement from her that's like in print. She's like, I'm sorry, I have perfect breasts and a great body. Like, but that's just who I am. And I have a friend who texted us while she was watching. She was like, I'm not gay, but damn, I could not stop looking at her breasts. Like, I had to keep. She was like, I kept rewatching it because I was like, oh my God.
So she didn't lie. She has perfect breasts.
She did not lie. She has perfect breasts. And to be clear, if you have breasts listening to this, you have perfect breasts.
I would say all breasts are perfect breasts, baby.
Like,
and all absence of breasts, like large. I mean, it doesn't matter. Flat, small, round, big, asymmetrical. They're all perfect.
Yours, it's perfect. It's exactly the way it needs to be. But yeah, this friend was like, she was just like, surprised. No, I wouldn't say surprised, but she was just like, surprised. But she was just like, surprised. She was just like, surprised. But 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 she was just I felt like she wanted to share with us, because we're queer, about like how attracted she was, right? Like she wanted to just kind of like celebrate that moment. And so it was just like this fun little moment for us. And so I think when we allow ourselves the opportunity to explore otherwise unknown parts of ourselves, yeah, I think you'll see that you do exist on a spectrum. Um, I have I was gonna go into a story about the first girl that I started talking to when I came out, who was toxic as I wanted to ask you first, like, what has your experience been in navigating? Because you identify as bisexual,
Pansexual.
pansexual. Okay, so like, what is your experience been in navigating heteronormative versus non-heteronormative relationships there?
As far as differences?
Yeah, differences or similarities.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you. I think ultimately, although, I mean, to be clear, I've never been in a long-term relationship with a woman, so I don't have the same depth of experience that you do. But, the experiences I have says to me that it's similar in a lot of ways. I mean, it's still about, I don't know, the flirting and the feelings that you have for someone new and the getting to know each other and the awkwardness and the uncomfortableness and then the like settling into more comfort. And my husband now, being in a heteronormative relationship, like, I mean, clearly I know he's a man and clearly that's great. And if he listens, you're an amazing man. And there's a point in a relationship where I feel like it's less about any of that. Like, I don't know. Like, I think after the initial lustful beginning part of a relationship, it really, truly, it becomes about the person. That's when I feel like I'm in a relationship versus just dating, is when I'm now like, yeah, you still want to have sex, still all of that stuff, but I'm not thinking about that part of you. It's just like, who are you as a human, right? And you start to, I don't want to say you lose your gender because that sounds, again, my
That
husband's
sounds like
very...
an 80s song or a 90s song. Lose your gender.
My husband's still very manly and all of those things. But like, I just don't think about it in that way. I'm not thinking like me, woman, him, man. I'm just thinking we are two humans doing life together. And ultimately, I think that like is what's sort of similar. I don't know. There are times though where I'm like, you don't get what this part of my life is like. Whereas when I had been, with women, it is like, oh, we get that. As one example, not that I have a similar example being with a woman at this time because I was with my husband, but when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, I cried. I cried a lot. And I cried that night and I was really distraught because I knew what it meant. And I was right about what it meant and I knew it. And in that moment, I just felt like I have just lost a big part of my humanity because I will not be viewed as a human deserving of equal health care as men now. And that's really, like, it was really upsetting. And my husband tried to understand, but like, I know he couldn't quite understand. He doesn't have a uterus. He doesn't get that experience. Whereas I think if I were with a woman in that moment, I think she wouldn't have to try to understand. I feel like another uterus having person, I feel like that person would just have that shared understanding. But let's be honest, those types of moments aren't daily for me. It's not like every time, but there are those moments where I think this would be a little different if I were in a relationship with somebody who got that. But also, there's a lot of things, like you said, where we grew up in the same town. We have a lot of shared understanding around those things about what something means or what being in a certain part of town looks like or what someone locally says a certain thing. And we can both, without even having to say anything, understand what that is about. So like, yeah, that's one element of our identities that we don't share that might be easier if we did, but there's also a whole lot of other things that we share.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my experience really is what you said. It's a lot the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what I like, how you framed it, like after like the lust part, right? Where body parts, I mean, they always are going to mean something, right?
But they're like they're more of the focus at the beginning.
Yes, they're more of the focus in the beginning because pheromones, hormones, like the literal biological laws of attraction, right? That we succumb to as human beings. And I think when you're trying to build something with someone, it's less about that and it's more about like, how do we enter into this partnership in a way that honors the needs of us individually, but also as partners. like, how do we go about the day by day? Like, some of my favorite moments with my wife are like running errands, like doing the mundane stuff, like being in the car, not necessarily gabbing it up, like
body doubling, right? Where you're
body
just
doubling. Yeah. Like
same.
having someone to do those things with, like, it just, when you're, and not that it's like depressing to do those things when you're by yourself. It's not. It's just a fact of life. There are things that need to get done, but like in the mundaneness, if that's even a word of it, it's like, oh, I have a partner, like I have a teammate, you know, to do this with, and it makes it less boring. It makes it less, not less of a burden, but it changes the dynamic of like of doing those things. And I think sometimes hetero people miss that point, right? That it's like, sure, like attraction is important. Like you should be attracted to the person that you're with. Like you shouldn't necessarily commit yourself to someone that you don't find attracted, unless that's your kink. Like I'm not here to yuck anybody's yum, but also like if you're in a place where you're looking for something that's long term, like you have to think beyond that. Like you have to think, what is this person going to be like when I am at my most down, when I'm at my highest, in the boring shit? Like, how is this person going to partner with me when I'm sick? Like,
when I have a baby and my body radically changes, when we get old and we both have wrinkles and our hair is growing in weird places. Yeah. Because my husband and I are getting into that phase of life. Like we're both, you know, we're nearing 50. We're entering the third act of life. And I'm as wildly attracted to him as I was a decade ago. But both of our bodies have changed a lot. And we've both packed on some pounds, and like, you know, parenting will sometimes do that, and getting older and all of that. You know, he's losing his hair. We're both going gray. We're like all of the things, but my attraction hasn't changed. And that's because I think from the start, my attraction really wasn't about his body. And I think that was a lot of that freedom that I finally had internally to, one, own my queerness and who I really am, and to like honor that I just am attracted to people and not attracted necessarily to particular genitalia. I'm attracted to a person. And so I felt more freedom to be open with that, with myself, in how I approached things with him. So I don't know. I think, and also doing a lot of my own work to unpack a lot of the bullshit about looks and all of that for myself, so that I was able to go into the relationship in a different place. I mean, so much of it was about me and not about the person, right, that I'm with, but it was about me and how I showed up in that relationship. And I think that has made all the difference, because now I'm like, I can totally see that picture of being 90 or 85 walking down the street together. And when I see little old couples like that, like I was just watching a video of these two women who had been together for 42 years. They're like these 80-year-old women who are being interviewed on the street, and they're asking them like, what's the key to having a 42-year relationship? And they're just kind of like, take it day by day, be there for each other, whatever. And none of it was about, you know, marry the person that you want to hump every day, or, you know, whatever. It was about like, see this person, be with them, be their day, to take it day by day, just be together. And that I really do think is important. That goes back to what you said at the beginning about those people who post on Instagram as couples. And I think the thing that kind of annoys me, and I wonder if it's part of why those couples aren't as successful, is because it smacks of people who are still really caught up in the physical and not as much about like the depth, which happens offline.
I agree. And I think when it comes to like posting stuff online, also like we post things online occasionally, but it goes just back to that idea also in general, whether you're in a couple, dumb or not, of just like any work that you do as an individual person on yourself and on your life, like the hard stuff. First of all, nobody wants to post that, right? If you were to compare how many people post about the hard stuff and how many people post about the fun, light stuff, like I would argue there's a big discrepancy there. But also stuff that gets posted online is usually very polished and curated, and like that is not life at all. That is not relationships at all. Like relationships are not polished and perfectly curated unless you are a celebrity, right? And then I would argue that those aren't real relationships. Those are PR. tactics, right? And so when I think about my relationship with my wife, I would argue we have a great relationship that is not without its low points.
And no relationship isn't. And I think, but isn't it funny how like I feel the need and this like worry of if my husband's listening, I want to make sure that he knows I'm still saying like I think he's very manly and like and like you said, like and I, you know, we have a good relationship. Like we feel that it's the same way we do with our parenting of this like anytime we talk about anything that's hard, I can always feel like this need to like but like I still love my kid or but like I love my partner. Like we feel that need to say but really it's okay. And I think social media has done a lot of that to us, but it's just the sphere of judgment. It's the external stuff because of course your relationship isn't without problems. Social media, those Instagram couples that present themselves as having no problems. And by the way, how many of them do we later see? Oh, by the way, he was cheating on her the whole time or they got divorced for blah, blah, blah. Like it's wild how often that happens with those couples who put themselves out there for judgment. Yeah. It's like they need that external validation to have the internal belief that everything's okay. And the truth is relationships are fucking hard and messy. It is just how it is.
Yeah. I mean, there are too many times that I have been an asshole to my wife that I care to think about, you know? And so it's, and, you know, we make up and we laugh about it later. Like we literally had a moment like that, like last week, I think, or maybe over the weekend. And we were fucking laughing about it the next day. Like,
yeah, my husband and I had a fight 2 days ago, but you know what else comes out of fights? Growth.
Yes. Opportunities to communicate.
Yes.
Opportunities to communicate your needs and, you know, what's really going on.
Another problem, I think, is too many of us never saw healthy conflict growing up. So we don't understand that conflict is healthy. It is how we begin to understand each other, come to agreements, how we make concessions, how we move forward together, how we discover each other's values. Like all of these things come out of conflict. But so many of us grow up where conflict is a bad word, where conflict has a lot of trauma associated with it. I'm one of those people, so I get it. And so that's been a challenge for me in my relationships. Not just this one, has been a habitual challenge of me learning how to stay in it when there's conflict, because my fight, flight, freeze, fawn response is to flee.
Yeah.
As soon as there are conflicts, I'm out of there. I'm in a anxious avoidant attachment style. And that's the avoidant part. Like when there's conflict, I'm done. And I've had to really, really learn how to say, I can be with conflict. I can be with this discomfort and know that we're okay. Like, and that's been hard, but we're at that place where we can have a fight now. And I understand he's not going to leave me. I don't have to leave him. Even though my initial thought, as soon as there's still a decade later, as soon as there's a fight, my initial thought is, well, this is over. We're going to be getting divorced. Like, where am I going to live? Like my brain immediately goes there every single time.
Yeah.
And I have to stop it and say, no, we are committed. We have talked about this again and again. We are both deeply committed to staying in this relationship. And this conflict could be good because from this, we'll have a discussion. You know, this particular conflict was about parenting styles. That's something that's a challenge for us. But with the conflict, opens up these doors to have more conversations and to start to see each other's points of view and try to say, how do we do this thing together? But I mean, that's fucking normal. You have to. Anyone who thinks you have that the sign of a healthy relationship is no conflict, that's a problem. But I see that a lot. And that's a real problem. And I think that Instagram thing, that posting all these happy photos is really contributing to that and is a red flag.
Conflict avoidance. Yeah. I think it's a manifestation of conflict avoidance when you're just like, oh, we're so happy. Look at us, blah, 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 whatever. And so, and I think what happens is like for people like us who grow up with like negative experiences with conflict or no model for how to handle conflict, like we equate conflict with dissolution of a relationship. Or like if you grew up with a pattern of abuse, then conflict equals abuse, right? And that's not always the same thing. And I also just want to make it very clear that like there's a difference between like having a conflict about something and not being values aligned about something, right? Like if you are having a conflict about how to handle a parenting situation, but like, and well, let me not use that example because I'm not a parent, so I don't want to go there. But if you're having a conflict about like what's I fucking have for dinner, which is the majority of our conflicts in my
I think that's number one for most the relationship killers. What do you want for dinner? I don't know. What do you want for dinner? Yeah.
I don't know. Do you want this? No. I thought you didn't know. Well, I didn't.
I know it's not.
But if you're having a conflict about whether or not women should have access to abortions, that's not a conflict. That's a values disalignment, right? And so I think that is a completely different conversation to be
for sure. Well, I can bring that to a very real world example around parenting with my partner. I mean, he grew up in I think many of us grew up in a time, especially as Gen Xers, where spanking was the norm. And I was very adamant and clear from the very start. Well, very quickly. I guess it was one of those things where I never thought that I would spank my child. It just wasn't a thing that entered my brain. Like that is not how I would show up. I don't know that we ever spoke about it before having a kid because I think I made that assumption that we feel that way. And then once it was clear that, oh no, spanking was something that he thought might still be on the table, that was not a conflict. That was a values misalignment where I made it very clear, this is how I see the world and this is my value set. And if we can't agree on this, then we're not going to be able to co-parent together. I will have to leave, right? There's no, how do we find middle ground? How do we resolve this conflict? It's no, this is my line in the sand. And he very quickly was like, oh, I get that. And okay. And I'm okay with that. And I'm staying on board. Right. But that's not, to me, there's no conflict there. That is nope, this is a hard line in the sand for me.
Yeah. So, going back to whether or not like queer relationships are different from like heteronormative relationships. And this is when I first came out a little over 10 years ago. And just for like context, I'm about to be 43. So a little over 10 years ago, it was like 30, right? 30, 31 for me. So I am what some people would consider like a late bloomer in terms of like coming out and like being a part of the queer community and all of that. And honestly, the way that I found it easy to come out and like accept that part of myself was through my politics. The more I learned about feminism and understanding power structures and having an analysis of like power dynamics and systemic oppression, the easier it became for me to accept that part of myself. So from the get-go, queerness was a political identity for me. But so I remember just like having this conversation over and over again with different friends at different times about like, is it easier to like date women or like talk to women than it is to talk to men? Because I don't want to say a lot, but I would say probably at least half, maybe a little bit more of my friends identify as straight. They are heteronormative. And so they were just very curious about what it would be like which I could argue is part of the spectrum, but not going to go there. They were just very curious about what's the difference between dating men and dating women, right? Like or dating people who don't identify as men. And honestly, there isn't much, at least for me, there wasn't much difference. Like, I remember asking people in my life who were already out, like, well, how do I talk to her? And they're like, well, the same way you would talk to a man. Like there is no difference. Like, you just approach them the same. I think just there's this assumption of like in the straight pathway, right? That like there's a game that you have to play when you're dating. And is that game the same when you are not in a heteronormative path or journey?
I might argue that one of the reasons why it may seem similar is because of that political piece that happened first or concurrently. Because I think you and I would not date the way, I don't mean each other, but like if we were out on the dating scene, we would not be dating in the way that women who had done no amount of unpacking all of this bullshit would date. You know what I mean? Like, I think that necessarily changes the way. So I think that these relationships, but I also think that maybe it wouldn't matter because I think you could also be, because you mentioned them, the queer people who have done none of this work, you could still be a lesbian out trying to date women and still showing up with all of this white
Toxic
supremacist,
masculinity.
all of the bullshit, right? And the way you would date might look more heteronormative in the traditional sense than the way you would show up, right?
Yeah.
I could go out and date and look for men if I were still the way I would have been 20 years ago.
Yeah.
That dating would look, I would be repulsed by myself now, but that dating would look so different than how I would show up now, whether I was dating men or women. So I do think I think there could be differences, but I think those differences also I think that's about have you done the work or not?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I agree with you because the first girl that I talked to that I met online, this is a wild story, by the way. I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible, but the first girl that I talked to online, I got on OkCupid because I was like, yeah, I'm just going to go out there and just explore. And so, and to be completely transparent, I had never really dated before I came out. I had a little fuck buddy who was a dude and we had great sex, when I was a lot younger. But I had never really dated because, if you're into astrology, I'm a Capricorn sun, Virgo rising, Pisces moon. So I have a lot of other earth signs in my chart. And I was always the overachiever, ambitious person. And so my thought process was, I don't have time for romantic entanglement. I got shit to do. I got goals. And so it just seemed like a waste of time to me. But then when I came out, I was like, you know what? Let me just kind of explore this and just kind of be in my body and not in my head so much. And the first girl that I started talking to, this was when I was in Atlanta. And if you know anything about Atlanta, the queer community there is off the chain in the best and worst ways possible. And so we started talking at OkCupid. We met up a few times and she was toxic as fuck. She played me so badly, gaslighting, manipulation, emotionally abusive, and we only talked for maybe, we were only talking, hanging out for maybe 4 or 5 weeks. And it was so bad. First of all my friends hated her. All my coworkers hated her. It was so bad that my therapist had to put her therapist hat aside and be like, I don't like this person. This is not, and, therapists try to get you to see things for yourself and ask you really intentional questions about things like that and try to help you see where there are patterns of abuse and things like that. But she had to just come out and just be like, this is dangerous. You need to do something. This is not a healthy place for you to be. And I didn't see it. And it was such an awful time. And she was what most people would consider a stud in Atlanta. And I am 100% positive she slashed my tires one night. It was so bad. It was so bad. And the person I met immediately after that is the person that I'm with now, my wife. And we've been together for 10 years, married for 7. And come to find out, on the 3rd date with my wife, the person that girl, I'm not going to say her name, but that girl who told me that she had previously been engaged or had cut it off, had not cut it off. And the person that my wife was previously talking to, before talking to me, they were the two that were engaged to each other. And we found out just through random conversation. And it was just whoa, okay, and I don't think they knew, and they were cheating on each other with us. And so I don't think that they knew that what they were doing. But my point is there was so much toxic masculinity embedded into this person in a female body, in a woman's body, who identified as a woman lesbian, that that's what she knew. That was her context. That was her experience. And so this idea that it's different is not always the case. It's not always because again, your every individual's context and their experience and their unwillingness to unpack harmful ideologies within themselves, that shows up in your relationships, whether or not you identify as straight.
For sure. Yeah, I agree. And whoa, what a story. You guys could write
Yeah. It was what?
You could write like a Hallmark special or something. Maybe not Hallmark, whoever that is. The last thing I wanted to quickly touch on really quickly, if we have time, because we're talking about conflict. And the one conflict that my husband and I have had on an ongoing basis, and I mean this in like the most like joking kind of conflict, but is I keep suggesting that we need to have separate bedrooms because I think we would both sleep better. Turns out I actually now, upon more reflection, because I have been sleeping, I sometimes sleep in my son's room with him because he wants me to, and he's still at that age where he likes to snuggle and it's hard to turn him down. And my husband actually sleeps worse when I'm not in the bed. I tend to sleep better when I'm not in the bed with him. And so I'm like, let's do it. And he's like, no, that's like the sign of the end of a marriage or something. And I'm like, I don't know that that's true. So anyway, I just today got an email from some women's thing saying that 30% of couples sleep in separate beds or separate rooms. And it's so funny because it reminds you of like those 50s shows of like I Love Lucy where they're in separate beds and stuff. And we think of that as like this like sad thing. And I actually am like, the older I get, the more I get it. Because I'm like, especially in perimenopause, I want no one to touch me. I cannot stay. We have very different temperature needs. I would like my room to be like 50 degrees if I could. He wants it to be like 75. I'm miserable. He's great. I'll snuggle up in his blankets. So like temperature, snoring issues.
Yeah.
He likes to sleep with the TV on, which is like horrible. And I don't let him, but then I can't go to sleep till after he gets to sleep because the TV's on until he goes to sleep. And like, we should have all of these things. We like our bed at different, like we have an adjustable bed. I like it a different height than he does. And I know we could get a split adjustable bed, but that's a lot of money and we don't have that right now. So anyway, what are your thoughts on separate bedrooms? Yeah, I was shocked to find out 30% of couples do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm the same as you. I sleep better when my wife is out of town or when we're not sleeping. Like, we're not sleeping in the same room right now because I have COVID. And so I'm kind of quarantining in the bedroom and she's sleeping downstairs in the living room with the dogs. But she sleeps worse when we don't sleep together. And I just generally don't like being touched. Like, it's just sensory overload for me. And so, but she's a big cuddler. And so we used to have a queen size bed. And between her and the dogs, like, I was just like, I can't fucking take it. We need to get a king size bed because I need more space. That did not help.
But same here. King size bed's better because at least like I can put, like, we do through my forcefulness and assertiveness, we don't touch at night. I don't think it says anything about the quality of the relationship.
I don't think it does either.
I think it's just as you get older, you get more practical about sleep.
Yeah. And I think it's just different people have different needs. And I think it's just a way to honor those needs. And I understand it's not just a physical commitment, but it's a bit of an emotional commitment for some people. And so I get that. Like, I'm not going to like force my wife to always like sleep in separate places for me, but I totally get it. Like, if my wife were on board, I don't know that we would sleep in separate rooms, but we might have separate beds. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we never share a bed.
Correct. You still have conjugal visits, baby.
Right.
But
like you can still have that time together. But I remember reading something years ago about couples who take separate vacations and how that helps to contribute to their just overall well-being.
Do we see this? Do you know what I think the theme is on a lot of that? Separate bedrooms, separate vacations, not doing all the shared Instagram accounts and or just posting about yourselves. I think it is about honoring the fullness of each person in the relationship. And remember that we are two separate ass fucking humans that are whole individual people that have our own lives. And I think where we get into trouble is when we start losing ourselves. This idea of like, we're now complete, you complete me. I hate all of that kind of rhetoric because I am complete. Yeah. I will
with or without you.
Yeah, I'd be very sad if my husband were to like drop dead tomorrow. I love him dearly. I don't want to lose him. I don't want us to divorce. Like, I don't want us to be separate in that way. But also, especially as an introvert, I need a lot of me time.
Yes.
I need to be alone. And I think the problem is he needs that less than I do, which is why we have, and maybe you're the same way where your partner might be a little more extroverted and
a lot more.
So is mine. And so I think that's part of the problem. Maybe introverts should marry each other. I don't know. It's great because it also means that he makes me get out of my shell and like go see the world and things. But that is the conflict.
Yeah. It's growth edges. My wife is like 100% extrovert. Like, it's nonstop gabbing from the moment she wakes up. And she will literally fall asleep in the middle of a sentence. That's how much of an extrovert she is. So, but and again, it's not like you do everything separate. Like, if you take separate vacations, you can still take vacations together. If you sleep in separate rooms or separate beds, you can still sleep together whenever you want. It's just having that option, I think.
It's the freedom. Yeah, there is some piece of that freedom of like, and to be able to do it in a way that doesn't insult the other person, which is where I think having the understanding and the agreement and the arrangement around it. If like, I'm not taking this vacation alone because I don't love you or because it says anything about where we are. It's just something that I need, or I'm not sleeping in the other room tonight because I don't love you or I'm mad at you or anything else. It's just something I need.
Yeah.
But I don't know if my partner and I will ever get there, not with the separate bedrooms, and definitely not the separate vacations yet. Although I do my quarterly solo hotel, which I'm very due for. I do 2 nights, a whole weekend by myself in the hotel, and my partner has no conflict with that. He understands it. He supports it. He's like, it's time for you to go do that.
Yeah.
So that is good. But the vacation thing, we don't take enough vacations. I think if we were taking several vacations a year, maybe that would be something.
It's expensive. It's expensive.
Yeah, I say we don't have the finances for that.
Yeah, we could do that.
If I were endlessly wealthy, that might happen.
I remember when I brought up the idea of me going on a solo vacation or a separate vacation from my wife, she would not be. So I was like, okay, this is a conversation for another day. Like,
these are future problems that we can't even afford right now.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like, you know what? We can't even afford it right now. So it's not.
The separate bedroom is kind of the same for us. It would have to be in my office, and I don't really want to take my office over with another bed. And so, like, it's kind of a futile discussion anyway. But I do bring it up from time to time to maybe just start to butter the bread a little. So maybe when it comes time, we'll see.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's incremental, and I don't want to intentionally hurt my wife's feelings. So it's just not going to happen right now.
Yeah. I think that's something we're always mindful of, which is, again, that reason we're always kind of like, just a reminder, I love him very much. I love her very much. Let's be very clear.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't wait to see what ChatGPT tells me the theme of what the episode was about. I always, at the end, I feed here's a little behind the scenes for everybody. I feed the transcript into ChatGPT and I say, give me suggestions for a show title. Give me suggestions for like what this episode's about, what keywords. And I'm interested to see. I know the theme is relationships. We'll see what else it tells me.
Yeah.
I'm very interested to see.
If you have thoughts on this, if you dated more than one gender or sexuality and have different experiences, we would love to hear from you. So email us, messyliberation@gmail.com. Leave a comment on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast.
Same if you guys are in separate bedrooms. How's it working? What was the conflict? How did you convince your partners to say yes? I posed this question on Threads once and was shocked at how many people said they do. There were the people who pushed back on like, I can't imagine, like that were like aghast by it. But so many people told me, we've done it forever. Or for a lot of people, it happens when they have kids. That I noticed was a very major thing. Like I had the kid, because you start to get used to like sleeping with your kid to get them to sleep and stuff. And then eventually you kind of get used to and kind of enjoy. That's sort of what happened for me. Of
like, ooh, this is nice.
I kind of like this little vacation away from my partner in bed. So anyway, tell us. We want to know. And thank you for being here yet again on this, what felt a little rambly in some ways, a little like all over the place, but hopefully still interesting.
I mean, that's what relationships are. They're kind of all over the place sometimes.
And that's kind of what the show's about, right? It's messy. So there you go. Here was another perfectly imperfect, messy episode for you.
Thanks for listening to Messy Liberation.
Will you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen?
I know people say that all the time. And if you're like me, often you just go on to the next podcast. But truly, taking that moment to do that will really help us reach a wider audience.
Thank you so much for your support and for listening today.
Until next time.